Hello, everyone. Grand War Master Horace Lupercal here, and today we're doing something momentous. So, in the advent of the new year coming at us like a bolt from the blue, there's going to be some changes that are happening on this channel. We're doing a bit of a soft reboot, I guess you could call it. So, as such, I kind of feel like it's a good time to sort of establish a foundation of sorts. Because you come here to listen to our opinions, but how do you know if you can trust or understand the opinions of someone whose taste you don't know? So, for those of you who might be coming in as new viewers, and for those who've stuck around for a long time now, this is a bit of a novelty, but it's also a way to understand who I am, where I'm coming from, what my taste is, and hell, you can make fun of me for it too. It's a win-win for everybody. So, what I've got here is I have a list, and not just a list. No, not just a list. But I, in fact, have a series of tiers that I am going to place my favorite albums of all time into. What are these tiers? What do they mean? Fuck all, honestly. They mean whatever I or you want them to mean. Basically, it's just a designation to make different levels of this little list here, because I have 180 albums in this list, all of which are the albums that I have rated a 10 out of 10. So I have 180 perfect records, and normally I keep a list of my favorite albums and I kind of update it as I go, just because I'm a dork. That's what I do. But every so often, I like to start fresh. I take all of the entries on my list and I will put them in an order that feels more right for my current self. So I am going to do that today with a caveat. There are no revisions. Once I place something on the list, that is where it goes. Why? I don't know, because I fucking said so. But basically, this is more or less just an excuse to talk about a bunch of cool music. So naturally, tell me about some of your favorite albums. And, you know, if you have experiences with any of these, which I'm sure you do, some of these are pretty fucking famous, then tell me about them in the comments below. Get a good discussion going, man. But today, we're ranking the best of the best. This is the final frontier of music for me. This is the pantheon of the greatest I have ever listened to, in my own opinion. Down here, we got The Path of Radiance. Is this a tier? Is this a Fire Emblem reference? Who's to say? Then, next 10 entries, we have The Mountains of Might. It's alliterative. That's supposed to mean something. I did not sleep very well. Oh no. This has been fucked up. No. So now we have The Threshold of Titans. Again, this I don't really know what it means. The Bulwark of the Bold. The Highlands of the Heroic. The Realm of the Righteous. The Incorruptible Kingdom. And to close out the top 80 here, we have The Vestige of the Victorious. And now, in the top 100, we have The Throne of the Unbidden, The Stalwart Stronghold, The Kingdom of Creation, The Phalanx of the Feared, The Fortress of Fortitude. That was really the best I could do. Did I mention that I'm tired? The Fiefdom of the Free. That's a word you can't say it and have it sound right. The Shrine of Superiority. The Halls of... I used heroic twice, didn't I? Heavenly. The Halls of the Heavenly. And finally, The Precipice of Power. And at number 1, the all-time greatest. The Inheritor of the Divine Domain. So this is flavor text, but basically, all this is I'm going to list my favorite albums in the best order I can determine. And just so I know, I've got everything, all my ducks in a row here, I have taken the 180 10 out of 10 albums that I used to comprise my previous list, and I randomized them so that basically I had a cheat sheet on standby of all of the albums that I wanted to talk about, but they are not in the order that they originally were, so I have nothing to go based on. This is purely, I'm doing a fresh, clean break. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the bottom to the top. Real simple. Hopefully this won't be too fucking long, but, you know, with me, I'm a yapper. Okay, let's take a look at what we've got here. What should be the first album? The album that separates, that delineates the favorites from the not that. The failures? I wouldn't call 9 out of 10's failures. Okay, first entry. I feel good about this. Malten Aika by Moon Sorrow. If you are a longtime viewer or listener, you know that I go pretty hard for melodic death metal, prog metal, all that kind of stuff. Varieties of, you know, extreme European metal and, you know, bands that not necessarily super popular over here. I like to find me some oddballs to really fixate on. And one of my biggest, earliest metal fixations was the death metal band Moon Sorrow, who have just a staggeringly great output of records. Like, truly, if you are interested in prog metal, melodic prog, kind of like sort of adjacent to some modern stuff like Seor, I guess would be a good basis for comparison here. But this album is generally regarded as one of their best. Jumalten Aika, I think that translates to the Age of Gods, if I'm remembering correctly. This is one of the first like extreme metal albums that I really got into. And really, it's just kind of solid musicianship is what keeps this so sturdy and so afloat. Is that compositionally, this thing is absolutely marvelous. It really has a time and place. You feel the bitter Nordic wind listening to this album. You feel like a marching Viking in this thing. And I mean, it sounds absolutely incredible. The recording here is gorgeous. It feels like you are witnessing an epic poem set to just some of the most inventive, awesome, and explosive sort of melodic death and black metal you've ever heard. This is a killer album, but the reason it's probably not much higher on my list is that it's not a super emotionally resonant album. It's a transportative album, but it isn't necessarily hitting me in the deepest core of who I am. I just think that it is a resplendent reminder of the power of heavy music, which is enough to get it on this list. Hopefully this gets easier as it goes, as I have fewer things to pick from, but boy howdy, this is tough. Okay, next one. I've got it. At number 179, we have the Elliott Smith self-titled. I mean, there's not really much that I feel like innovative or new that can be said about Elliott Smith, an artist of simple pleasures, not to diminish the man's musical talent and complexity, which I would never do. He was an incredibly underrated composer and guitarist, honestly. Like, you know, you associate Elliott Smith with the guitar, but I feel like his actual skill in the realms of songwriting beyond just lyrics when it comes to, like, the proper construction of a song, deeply undervalued talent. This is the first Elliott Smith album I heard, and I kind of always just kept going back to it. It was one of those albums that I was fixated on for a really long time, and I found it really difficult to progress to other records, so I would finally, you know, I went in order after this with, like, Roman Candle onward. But this is just one of those albums where its simplicity really is the driving force of its perfection. And that's not to say, like, oh, it's so simple that it has to be, you know, perfect. That really, really undermines the thought and talent that went into making this. And I mean, this has classic songs on here. Needle in the Hay, the Royal Tenenbaums Needle Drop of that is pretty immortal. Pretty sure that's how I first discovered Elliott Smith as an artist in general, was through that movie and that Needle Drop. And this is just, it's incredible 10 out of 10 song after incredible 10 out of 10 song. And it's at this point where Elliott Smith is still, it's a little earlier on, and it's difficult to gauge just how different of a writer he was on an album by album basis, but this is sort of still towards the start of his career and everything, and I feel like it gives this indelible quality of meeting this amateur kind of rough shot production style, but this obvious wonderkin songwriting talent that just creates something really earthy feeling. It's very cozy of a record, even though emotionally I would argue that it's really thorny and really difficult to unravel. I mean, like Needle in the Hay is a really great example of just how ruthless he could be when it came to his words. And it was the album that really kind of taught me how to love Elliott Smith, because I had checked out Either Or years before, and I think just something about the simplicity of that record kind of washed over me at the time. I love it now, but I just kind of thought for a while, maybe Elliott Smith isn't quite for me. But the older I get, the more I disavow my previous self, and listening to this so much definitely let me become a much bigger fan of some of Elliott's other works that I actually do end up preferring to this. But it's a very nostalgic, and in some respects it's a basic album in the broadest sense, but I do again sort of feel like that's kind of the magic of the experience. It excels at the fundamentals better than anything, even though I would say that his writing style is the furthest thing from an exercise of the fundamentals. He, as a writer, Elliott Smith kind of specialized in these really strange, thorny, almost self-defeating sentiments that just, they hit you harder the more life that you lived, I find anyway. Okay, starting off strong. And just for the record, I am kind of technically, well, I don't know when this is going to come out in relation to that, but yeah, there are albums from this year on there. I did include the three albums that I gave a 10 out of 10 to on this list, so it is kind of a preemptive spoiler, but who cares? More content for the content farm? Got another one, kind of in the same vein, same target audience for sure, but now I think I gotta go with If You Feeling Sinister, Belle and Sebastian. We love our really sad Irish and English and Scottish songwriters on this channel. If You're Feeling Sinister, I did talk about this, I believe, when I first listened to it, I think 3 years ago now, because Riley was such a big Belle and Sebastian fan, and I finally started tearing into their classic records, and I just remember this immediately leapt out at me as being like, oh wow, this is it. I've never really fully gotten bands like the Smiths, and even to a lesser extent REM over the years. There are albums from them that I love. I mean, I obviously I love an album like Automatic for the People, for instance. And the Smiths, we have an episode about The Queen is Dead, another album I love. But there's still a kind of a ceiling with those albums, is that's kind of where I top out with them. In terms of what I look for in my jangle pop, this is more like it. I know it's a little bit more of a blend of singer-songwriter and jangle pop, but to me, it's sort of the best of both worlds. There's just so much funny, wry, and also really deceptively intelligent songwriting on here. I would say that the level of songwriting here is like Dylan-esque, which is funny because Bob Dylan is actually referenced on this album multiple times, and with good reason. It's just the instrumentation is so lively and bubbly and textured. It's not necessarily as dry as you would expect something like this to be. And that's, again, that's part of its appeal. But it is primarily the songwriting and the hook writing that I find really impressive about this, that I come back to over and over again. Stars of Track and Field, man, that's one of the all-timer singer-songwriter openers and just songs in general to me. It's a classic for a reason. All right. We're gonna go to another Channel and Jake favorite with this one. The Scars of Man on the Once Nameless Wilderness. That is not how you spell that. By Panopticon. Panopticon, originally Kentucky-based black metal and bluegrass/folk band that won our album of the year in 2021 with And Again Into the Light, an album I did give a 10, an album that is on this list, but naturally that is my favorite Panopticon album. That said, I am kind of spoiled for choice because this band, they kind of do nothing but pitch straight hears. So I gotta pick and choose. And obviously, I love this album. Wouldn't be here if I didn't. But this record does kind of hold a special place in my heart that even an album I like more, like And Again Into the Light, albeit only slightly, can't quite fill. There was a kind of just exploratory or a kind of wide-eyed sort of rapture that I had with an album like this, specifically because it came from my home state and from the part of Kentucky that a lot of my family is from. And I was so wowed by this combination of colliding aesthetics that I never figured would have fit together. And not only that, but at the time, I didn't know just how blackened this black metal truly was, and how bluegrassy the bluegrassy parts are. And because the extremes are so extreme, particularly on this record, I think that was why it was so spellbinding to experience when it first came out. The first half of this, man, like, it's borderline black gaze in the way that it sounds, and I really do truly love that. And the second half maybe isn't quite as beguiling as that first half is. It's not as entrancing, but the more fundamental folk stuff, I also get a whole lot out of. I found it very comforting in a very rough year in which this came out. That said, I do like other Panopticon albums just a little bit more, and this does have it's not an inherent negative, but it is a double record. The sides of the album pertain to specifically the two main genres that make up this band. It's kind of split in half, even though they do still kind of mix both. But, you know, it's ambitious and it's risky, and I admire that in an album. Does it lead to being as consistent as, say, Autumn Eternal? No, probably not. But it's still incredible. It's still somebody pushing at the boundaries of their sound, which is already quite boundary pushing in the first place. What next? Dawn. Winter Journal. Mount Erie. I've been a big Phil Elverum guy for years now, and I've even really latched onto stuff that not everybody super duper loves between his many musical projects and at this point like 50 plus albums to his name. But I think these days I gotta admit that my favorite Mount Erie project is Dawn Winter Journal. Which is funny because I love Phil for being this really off-the-wall, wild experimenter of indie rock and indie folk. He's this guy who's like a mad scientist with the amount of albums, ideas, and genres that he ends up playing with. And normally I like it when he's at his most adventurous. Those tend to be my preferred entries in the discography. But Dawn Winter Journal is one of the most sonically stripped back things he's ever made. It's just the performances and the songwriting on here that I find so captivating. This is a premier, isolated breakup album. It's devastatingly sad, really self-examining, but in that kind of unique way that only Phil can really do. It really does sort of have an atmosphere about it, even though it is technically, you know, more of a dry recording. There's not a lot going on here, you know, but there's still stuff like interpolating Headphones by Björk on this album. When I got to that song on here, just a moment I will never forget when I was working like at my old job and I had that sort of moment of just being like, oh my God, I remember this melody. Where is it from? And then, he actually starts singing it. But the way that an off the wall idea like that doesn't feel out of place on an album that is otherwise a million miles away from what it's homaging at this point. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's heartbreaking. It's everything I kind of look for and want out of Phil, minus the experimentation. That's not a flaw that I feel like this album has. Clearly, it's just a quality that normally would allow me to be like, yeah, that's one of the reasons I love this. And yeah, I mean, I do love the recording here because like the bare bones effect does add to the experience, but I think that just kind of makes all of its other strengths feel all the more pronounced. It's why I like it as much as I do. Okay. More, I guess not recent, just because this was a listen that happened in 2024, like midway through, but we're gonna go with Game Theory by The Roots. I have not listened to every album by The Roots yet, even though I am working on it. I'm a little over halfway there, I believe, but the one I kept coming back to over and over again was Game Theory. The Roots are kind of one of those hip-hop sort of establishments. Not to say that they're like corporate or anything. Far from it. They are so well respected and their catalog is so ironclad that it just took me a while to even get to them in the first place. I was like, I don't even, something that acclaimed, you want to be in the right mood for it. And I was very glad that I waited until the right time to explore them, because The Roots are a band that kind of demand a bit of dedication. Like, reading up on things like theory and history does actually allow you to get to the point of albums like Philadelphia Half-Life or Things Fall Apart. It lets you get everything out of the experience. Game Theory, on the other hand, it's no less thoughtfully written, but it is, as an album, way less unwieldy than some of their, like, more traditionally held aloft records. Like, this is a pretty sharp 50 minutes, and it's even it's still a bit askew because I think the final song on here is like 8 to 10 minutes long, and frankly, it needs to be. It's a gorgeous tribute to the departed Jay Dilla, who, was a big collaborator in that scene, and like it's just a really sweet song. But like overall, just the energy of this album and the way that it is kind of a concept album about hip-hop, it's very, it could be like an Ouroboros, could be a snake eating its own tail, but like it's always interesting. Black Thought is just, he's the best rapper. I may have people I like more as like favorites and like artists whose work I just like a little bit more, but it's like, who is the best at the skill, the artistry of rapping purely? It's Black Thought. Of course it's Black Thought. It has to be. And again, no less of an amazing showcase on this record. It also does have some moments that are a little bit more accessible, but like in a fun, lively way. Like there's some real sort of like funk and rock inflected tracks on here. Like I blast Here I Come in my car literally all the fucking time because it's a rager. And you wouldn't think that The Roots band, as acclaimed, as kind of like academically sort of inclined to some of their stuff is, like literally they have an album called Things Fall Apart. I feel like that kind of says it all. But if you're looking for an in with The Roots and you're just like, oh, Philadelphia Half-Life looks so long, or, just Things Fall Apart is so intimidating, start here. It's no less quality than anything else, and it's a bit more kempt of a record, and for that, it's one of the best. Okay, going back to some old favorites now. Insurgents, Steven Wilson. A name you will probably hear a couple times while making this list. What, the frontman of my favorite band might show up here a couple of times? Say it ain't so. This being the lowest rated solo Steven Wilson album on this list, because there is another one. This is not to imply that I have changed my ranking, because I actually did do a sort of worst to best on Steven's solo stuff at the time of release. I think he's come out with 2 albums since then, so it is a bit outdated. But I did put Insurgents at number 1. And that's the thing, it goes back and forth with me. Like, I flip-flop on this and Hand Cannot Erase all the time. There's some days where I prefer the dark atmosphere and sort of sonic adventurousness of an album like Insurgents. And then there are days where the kind of narrative, thematic, and conceptual complexity of something like Hand Cannot Erase wins me over a little bit more. Today is just one of those days where I think that I'm leaning a little bit more towards Hand Cannot Erase. But again, Insurgents here, stellar album. In many respects, one of the most sonically out there things Steven has ever made, purely by the amount of influences alone. There's a fucking song on here that sounds like a Mars Volta B-side, which is fucking incredible, but there's also shoegaze, there's also dark ambient, there's just like all of the fringe things on the edge of Porcupine Tree sound kind of all meets together into this experience. It's so haunting and disquieting and subtle. It's not something that's going to leap out at you and immediately demand your attention. Like, this is something that I kind of had to grow with over the years to develop a full appreciation for. But again, this is some of the weirder tendencies of one of modern rock's greatest minds, and it's an excuse to be a little bit indulgent in those ideas. And that's why I really respect a lot of Steven's solo work, is that I do often feel like a lot of people who are solo acts coming from a more established band, they do kind of use some of their solo stuff to be a little bit more flippant, a little bit more just like, just make something to get it out there. And that's fine, like, do whatever you want. I understand. Like, I'm a writer, sometimes you just got to get something out there. But I do appreciate it when someone takes the time that no matter what name they're working under, they do so with intent, they do so with purpose, and they don't let brand recognition get in the way of curating a good experience. Okay, here's a good one. Return to the Void. A Shape of Despair. A recent favorite. This was 2022, maybe 3? I don't remember. I think it's 2. Almost my album of the year. Was for a good many number of months. Probably my favorite funeral doom album ever. I'm a big doom metal person. And this was a very charged moment for me to encounter a record like this, because this is an album that is about death, but it's about suicidality more than anything. It's about longing to be a part of the great expanse of nothing. And it's as grand and operatic and also kind of as miserable as that sounds. It's an album for luxuriating in misery, for kind of indulging your darkest thoughts. And sometimes, I know that that's not an experience for everyone, but something that, like, just serves as a kind of portrait for you to just project all of your negativity onto. It's really valuable. It's why I like doom metal as much as I do. And this kind of variant of funeral doom, it's about scale. It's about size. And this is an album that feels utterly massive. Riffs on here feel like continents shifting. The vocal presence is on here. There's the death doom kind of styled vocals. There's also the kind of female gang vocals on here. There's a lot of vocal variety, and the way the vocals mix together, phenomenal stuff. It adds a certain level of dynamism that is not often found on doom metal albums like this, because they're about feeling kind of glacial, but this has just enough of a forward thrust to feel like you're constantly going somewhere, but you're being dragged. And it's not like a fun album to experience, but when you need something like it, nothing is going to hit quite like this does, at least for me. A really valuable and special album that I think more people need to check out, personally. Okay, now we are going to the self-titled, I spelled this wrong, of Cool Casualties of Cool. first Devin Townsend project on here, definitely not the last. This is an album I shouted out on my alternative Americana videos. This is a sort of brainchild between two musicians, that being Devin Townsend and Shay Amy Dorval, who is primarily like a vocalist. Like, she's got her own solo stuff, but Devin sort of got a hold of her and made this project, which is essentially a alt country side project of Devin's that serves as this weird Lovecraftian kind of cosmic horror concept album. There's just nothing that sounds like this. Like, Devin's a phenomenal producer. All of his stuff always sounds amazing, but the clarity, the atmosphere on the instrumentation here, it's all so ghostly feeling. It's described by Devin as an album full of songs performed by the ghost of Johnny Cash. I can't give you a better byline than that. This is an album that it really kind of revels in its texture, which, I mean, I keep using that word, and it's just kind of shorthand for what I determined, like, the kind of synesthetic quality that music production kind of has on you. And there is this dense atmospheric quality that a lot of country music just doesn't really have. I would say that, like, somebody like Sturgill Simpson, for instance, is really great at kind of cultivating this atmosphere. Devin is as well. There's a lot of actually really good, sturdy songwriting on here, but it's really mostly just for the colossal totality of it. This is an album that spirals outward and becomes wider and wider and bigger, and it kind of sneaks up on you. And so for a while, like, I loved this album, but I didn't fully get everything that it gives its listener. You have to be patient with it. You do have to spend time, luxuriate with it, come back to it a couple of times. But one of the most rewarding albums on this list, honestly. I could put that on right now and have a wonderful time. I really recommend this to anybody who's even vaguely interested in not even just country music, because this is enough of, you know, just focuses on that sort of bluesy, otherworldly vibe that, like, I could see people who aren't even fans of country music digging the hell out of this. It's really fantastic. Okay, we are now crowning the king of the Path of Radiance, Fire Emblem Joke. And I think the person to hold this illustrious status, yeah, this feels right. All the pretty little horses, the inmost light. Current 93. I am a big Current 93 head. I have not heard all their records, because if you are a Current 93 head, you'll know that there are like 50 of them. And that's not even saying much to, like, there's many musicians who have been in this band, and they all come from different places, have different side projects and what have you. So this is a dense band. This is a difficult band to get into. They're a weird brand of electronic and psychedelic folk that there's nothing quite like this band. From the semi sort of spoken word and occasionally sung performance style, the dreary and apocryphal sort of nature of these albums, like, this album in particular to me is just the Current 93 album. And it's because it is so morose. It's like listening to an audio version of the Book of Revelations. Half of this album is actually kind of just very beautifully poetic nonsense. Like, some of it just doesn't cohere, and that's why it's brilliant. It is that apocryphal religious event that you are witnessing that you can't even... You lack the apparatus to verbalize the awe that something like this album instills you with. And it's creepy, it's strange, it's not for everybody. It's probably... There's not a lot of albums so far on this list that are super accessible. You know, I'm not just a guy who listens to a bunch of fucking basement-dwelling shit. Only mostly. There will be stuff on here that you can play for the hose. Don't worry. But this is premier scaring the hose music. Hell, there are moments where this album scares me. Like, I don't listen to this album a huge amount, primarily because it puts me in a very odd headspace. A headspace that frequently evokes Catholic trauma, but there is nothing like this. Even in Current 93's own discography, which is a phenomenal discography, by the way. Yeah, it's impenetrable. Yeah, it's big. Most of what I have heard from it is phenomenal and comparable to this quality level, insanely. I'm actually also talking about, there are two different versions of this album. The kind of studio normal album version, I think, is just called All the Pretty Little Horses, but the compilation that includes like a really prominent big drone piece, that's this version, the Inmost Light. And I feel like the experience isn't quite complete without it. And drone is also kind of a heavy element in this band's sound. Like, it is impossible to describe Current 93 to people in a way that like to people who think about music normally with like normal people brains. Like, if you were just trying to put the appeal of this band to like your mom, she'd probably have you committed. Like, it's difficult to put the appeal of this in a way that skews. But I do promise that if you're on the more adventurous side, this is going to be something that's deeply rewarding to you. I go back to this every once in a while, and I am kind of filled with the same almost like religious fervor that my initial listen gave to me. There's kind of a Nick Cavey quality about it, but it's also, it's even weirder. It's more taboo. It's more nonsensical, but in a way that makes emotional sense even when it doesn't make logical sense. It is this ever-evolving, there is a drama to it. There is a narrative here, but not a story, just in the way that it segues from idea to idea. It is very lyrical, even when there are not lyrics happening. Do I make sense? Are these words sensible words coming out of my mouth? I really hope they are. Jesus. Okay. We have The Path of Radiance at number 180. Yumaltan Aika, Moon Sorrow. 179, Elliott Smith. If you're feeling sinister, Bell and Sebastian at 178. 177, we have The Scars of Man on the Once Name Was Wilderness by Panopticon. 176, we have Dawn Winter Journal by Mount Eerie. 175, Game Theory, The Roots. 174, Insurgent, Steven Wilson. 173, Return to the Void, Shape of Despair. 172, Casualties of Cool, self-titled. And 171, All the Pretty Little Horses, The Inmost Light by Current 93. And we soldier forth to the mountains of might. Who will safeguard this tier, this section, this bracket? All right, we're gonna go with an industrial hip-hop classic, Absence by Dalek. I mentioned Dalek in our favorite MCs video at the start of 2025, and this is the album of Dalek's that I get the most out of. This is one of the few hip-hop albums I can breathlessly say is terrifying. Sonically, lyrically, even performance-wise, this is a difficult-to-stomach album. You know, Dalek are kind of seen as the pioneers of industrial hip-hop, and they are. But I feel like MC Dalek in general does not get his due credit for having untouchable pen game. The level of socio-cultural consciousness that is within these albums of like the classic run of Dalek albums is superb. Like, I would compare Dalek's sort of writing to that of somebody like More Mother or Billy Woods, but it's backed by production that is heavy, thick, metallic. It's like these beats sound like they are audio transcribed from a device that is trying to find a black hole. This sounds like instrumentals and music that come from the edge of the universe. And they're speaking on problems and issues inherent with, you know, imperialism, United States power structures, race, cops, institutional racism, systemic racism, heavy shit. But, you know, it kind of works in a, you know, it's poetic. The instrumentals and the lyrics, they match very, very well with their level of intensity. It's not an album I can listen to all the time, but when I am in the mood for it, again, there are few things that hit this hard. In terms of industrial music, you know, with Dalek, I do think they're stupendously underrated, but it's really like, it seems that the people who prop them up still don't really mention much outside of From Filthy Tongues of Gods and Griots, which is, you know, their kind of most revered classic record. But like, and that record's great. I love that record. This one, on the other hand, I feel like is just more committed to its bleakness. It's more committed to its aesthetic. It's more committed to the spirit of what I think Dalek is and what they're about. And I feel like it's really underrated. Like, the people who've heard it like it, but it needs more love. In the age of backwash and the age of clipping, we gotta pay respect to the OGs. And I mean, literally both the artists I just listed have mentioned that they are big Dalek fans. So, you know, pay some tribute to the greats and give Dalek's absence a listen if you are in the mood for some punishment. Okay. Next. Yeah, it's time. The Stranger, Billy Joel. This is probably the biggest left hook on my list so far, because everything else here is very, you know, very acclaimed, very within the realm of kind of online music discussion. It's either obscure, like Casualties of Cool, or it's, you know, a classic, like If You're Feeling Sinister, or self-titled Elliott Smith. But this here, this is a bit more populist of a pick, I must admit. And if you want to know my more detailed thoughts, we actually have a pretty excellent, if I may say so, record club comparing Billy Joel and Elton John to one another with two of their classic records, The Stranger and Honky Chateau. I did that episode with Riley, and we break down those two records and those two artists and what makes them interesting, comparable, and what makes them different. And The Stranger is just one of those albums that from childhood I was really, really enamored with. I remember hearing the song Vienna in 13 Going on 30, and that making me cry as a small child. Like, that's one of those songs that I was just like, oh wow, music can make me feel things. And, you know, I might have stories with some of these albums. You never know. But this is an album that when I look back on it, it's one of the more uncool albums that's in my lexicon and artistic canon. I don't care. There are going to be plenty of lame albums on this list by lame artists who people don't think are cool anymore. And I hope Billy Joel gets a bit of a reevaluation, because he does have a solid run of records and stuff like, you know, The Iron Curtain and Turnstiles and The Stranger here, like, and underrated records like Stormfront. But this is just kind of all of his best sensibilities sort of put together in a tight package that also really clearly embodies what Billy Joel, the artist, is about as well. And it's a record that, like, I kind of cite Fleetwood Mac's Rumors as sort of the apex of this phenomenon of being one of those albums that is so successful and so beloved because every single song on it is just so well known at this point. The Stranger is basically that. Like, it's, again, there's nothing on the level of Dreams on here, but, like, for, you know, this realm of pop music, yeah, like, these are all more or less standards at this point. And I feel like it works. Scenes from an Italian Restaurant is a gorgeously written song. Moving Out, Anthony's song, one of the catchiest and just generally most fun sort of pop songs of the 80s. I have a deep nostalgia for this record, but at the same time, I still view it as a quite conceptual work. There is some stuff that Billy is getting at on this record that I think is, you know, it's poignant, and it's examining a particular moment in a particular place in a particular time. You know, 80s New York. There's something really scrappy about this record, but there's also polish to be admired. I think this is an album that people generally like well enough, but, you know, Billy Joel's just kind of one of those terminally uncool artists that I have to still say that I possess a strong fondness for. And I still to this day really do love Billy Joel's The Stranger, probably one of the earliest albums in my top 10 of all time, like back before I listened to a bunch of music and just kind of drew one up from the albums that I had heard. This was on that list. And I mean, it's not top 10 anymore, but the fact that it's still here after I've listened to literally thousands of records, that's impressive in its own right. Next up. Okay, another album from the podcast days. Uman by Slift. This was one of those albums that came out in 2020 that really shocked me because it was from a band that I hadn't heard of before. It just kind of got popular in its own little internet bubble. And then I took a listen to it and I was like, oh my God, these guys beat King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard to making a garage prog album. And it's that, but it's also a hefty dose of space rock as well. And man, I love this combo. August is another person who really rides for this record. It was one of his favorite albums of 2020, and naturally one of mine. And this is just an expansive, psychedelic, immense record. The rhythm section on here is throttling. This thing is just a ton of fun, honestly. It's kind of an ideal sort of space rock experience. And, the lyricism kind of takes you on this long sci-fi journey. And it's, that has its place, but it's really the music here that keeps calling me. Its scope is so vast. It's so enormous that even from where it starts, the way that it just blossoms outward in terms of structure, in terms of detail, I can't say enough great things about it. It's very much the precursor to me finding one of my favorite bands of all time, which is the sort of stoner rock band Elder. This feels like a lost Elder album. And, well, I mean, judging by the quality, as you can no doubt tell, one of the best also. Okay, that's a good choice. Also another 2020 record, funnily enough. Indwell by Methwitch. Now we're getting into some real obscure rimcore shit. This is an album I only got to in 2024, I believe, and I did shout this out on my favorite things of the year list video. And I did so for a couple of reasons, primarily because I wanted to give it some exposure just because it's a very, online, very localized success. But this is like the only full-length album I think that this artist has put out. And this is a grindcore, death metal, mathcore, ass-beating, every noisy, angry genre imaginable. It's in here. But there is also, Linkin Park ballads also. Songs on here like Burn Victim will just tear the skin right off your flesh. I mean, this is a ferocious record. This is for people who like pain in their listening. And when I was having a really rough year, this album just kind of beat the shittiness out of me. If that makes sense. It cleansed me. It purified me. It was trial by fire. I genuinely think that the song Bed Full of Snakes on here is, first of all, the best lost Slipknot song ever, but is also just the most, hateful piece of music that I've ever heard. A fucking rager, to be sure, but this is an album that does feel evil in many respects, and it is actually a concept album about a man being possessed by a demon who is trying to kill himself before the demon fully possesses him. Kind of an edgy concept, but, once you learned that the guy behind this, a one-man dude who put all of this together, is a just random indie queer musician who has a lot of religious trauma, I think grew up in, Texas or something, and sort of channeled it into this absolutely unfathomably beautiful combination of the most hellish genres of music. You have to be very committed and very in love with extreme music to even attempt something like this. The fact that it's pulled off with such unbelievable skill is so impressive. I get a lot out of this. I haven't listened to it quite that much this year, but last year, it really gave me the thrashing that I needed, I guess. I highly recommend this album, but tread with caution. If the heaviest thing you listen to is Metallica, you may want to work your way up to this one. Moving right along? Yeah, okay. First, Frightened Rabbit album. It is The Winter of Mixed Drinks by Frightened Rabbit. For those who don't know, Frightened Rabbit, one of my favorite bands in general, one of my favorite indie rock bands, maybe my favorite indie rock band now that I think about it. We on the podcast have never shut the fuck up about how much we love this band. Scott Hutchinson, rest in peace, was my favorite songwriter who ever lived. And the world is a lesser place without him. And The Winter of Mixed Drinks is just evidence as to why. I have multiple Frightened Rabbit albums at a 10 out of 10. This is the lowest, purely just because something had to be. It's not because I like it any less. The sound of it is kind of the murkiest and the most kind of filled with a kind of sonic malaise more than any of the other albums, even the ones produced by Dessner, funnily enough. But it does have a kind of haziness to its instrumentation that does add to it, but does not result in the most immediate of listens. Like, I think Pedestrian Verse, for instance, kind of does a better job at immediately hooking you. But there are some all-timer songs in here. Again, Scott he knew that there were a billion ways you could phrase any given sentiment in a song. But somehow, man, he always found the right one for his music. And I don't know, The Winter of Mixed Drinks is just a perfectly balanced indie rock record. It is just, like, the momentum of it is great, but it's filled with kind of left hooks when it comes to structure and, just song conceits. You really feel like there is a conscious attempt to step his game and the band's game up from the Midnight Organ Fight. A terrific album, to be sure, but this is a bit more polished, but there is an active attempt on behalf of the band to still not, polish away all of the charm that they were working within. This is just, it's Frightened Rabbit. We have a video on them. It is kind of old at this point, so, tread with caution, though that is kind of home to some of our favorite moments as a podcast, like, came from that episode. We trauma bonded through that experience. But yeah, I can't say enough good things about the music of Scott Hutchinson, and the fact that the Winter of Mixed Drinks here is on the edge of this list and the edge of my ranking of those albums, that just goes to show you how much I fucking love that band. Another early podcast darling. Let's go with A Storm in Heaven by The Verve. This was one of the first discography breakdowns that we ever did on the show, and it was easy because The Verve only have 4 albums. But Riley and I got to talk about a band that is surely fit within the legacy of those kind of UK shoegaze acts that are viewed as, like, quasi-legendary these days. But The Verve don't really get the same amount of attention that bands like Slowdive or My Bloody Valentine did. Like, they'll have a single like Bittersweet Symphony, which is really, beloved and stuff, kind of fits into that canon of, Oasis and stuff like that. But they're more true blue shoegaze stuff, like their noisier stuff and earlier stuff. That's their best stuff, if you ask myself, if you ask Riley. And A Storm in Heaven is just a perfect shoegaze experience. It's full of color, it's full of texture, it's full of space, but it also does kind of feel suffocating. In an kind of entrancing way, this album it has a magical quality to it. It's fucking made out of pixie dust or whatever the fuck. I don't even know. I will say I admire mostly like the structure of this album. It's so perfectly paced. And, that just wasn't the priority in this scene a lot of the time. Like, sometimes albums, because of the time period and various factors and label things, some albums from this time period, they just run a little bit long, and that's just kind of the way things are. This, on the other hand, it's so concise. Again, curated to perfection. It's one of those albums that, like, if you are into that sort of 90s shoegaze scene, if you like Slowdive, you're gonna love this, because it's every bit as good as the classics from those records, just not held in the same esteem, doesn't have that same level of popularity, and it's a damn shame, just because they kind of became more famous for a sound that wasn't really where they began on that album with Bittersweet Symphony, which is a good album. It's a good song, but I'm dyed in the wool slow dive guy, big Souvlaki fan, so naturally I'm going to sort of lean toward the album that sounds a little bit more like that. All right, it's time. In a Silent Way, Miles Davis. I'm not going to claim to know a whole lot about jazz. I just think it's neat. I think it's nifty. Technically, the genre of music I've actually like listened to the longest. My mom had this like CD set of Ken Burns like jazz standards in it. So in a way, I've been listening to Miles Davis since before I've been listening to like any of these artists. Like I remember when I first turned on Kind of Blue and I was like, whoa, I remember this? And so getting into jazz and primarily Miles Davis, who is probably my favorite jazz musician if I had to pick, like it's Miles and like Alice Coltrane probably. But this is not the last time we will be seeing this man's name. The sort of split structure of this, the sort of dual piece that's on In a Silent Way, is just gorgeous. I remember that Riley, I think, once described the first half of In a Silent Way as like looking out at a lake that's totally still with like the fog of mid-morning coming on. And it's just like that image always really stuck with me. And I'm never able to like get it fully out of my head because he's totally right about it. The way that everything is mixed and produced, man, Miles and Tio Macero were on some unbelievable shit. Heroin, but goddamn, that shit had to be good if they were making music like this. Like Miles Davis is just one of those guys who, even in 100 years from now, I feel like he's going to be as cherished of a figure just because he was such a fucking unbelievable musical tight. Just you look at the amount of classic albums to his name and it's impossible to fathom. And these statements of, music, they're so grand and vast that like I appreciate the relative simplicity of In a Silent Way. It's kind of the most simple album from this phase of his career. It's minimal in a lot of respects, but it lets you appreciate the strength of every choice being made. It's just a deeply relaxing, enchanting, magical experience, and far from the last time that I will say such nice, lovely things about a Miles Davis album. Go back to unfriendly shit. Mirror in Darkness by Serpent Column. I discovered Serpent Column in, I think, 2022 and talked about going through their records and sort of getting into the newer projects because Serpent Column is technically disbanded, but it's just one guy, and he now mainly drops albums under the name of Theophonos, even though there was a new Serpent Column album, and actually, was that recently? Am I remembering that right? Oh, it was last year. We actually did get a newer Serpent Column album last year, unexpectedly, called Tassel of Ares, which was phenomenal. But this mixture of black metal, like blackened black metal, and mathcore is just some of the most ugly, abrasive music imaginable. There are times where the songs on these albums, and specifically Mirror in Darkness, where they're not even like instrumentally coherent. They barely make sense. And I've been listening to so much music that has like I was weaned on prog growing up. Sort of like when I discovered music, is that was the music that attracted me the most, and I still listen to a lot of prog. So I almost feel like mathcore is sort of the anathema to that, is because it's kind of the anti-prog in a lot of ways, but it is just as, if not more, musically complex in execution. So this kind of feels like the furthest that mathcore has been pushed when it comes to just raw sonic intensity. There are songs on this that, like, straight up, they sound more similar to shoegaze just because it's cloudy noise on top of cloudy noise. And the absolutely ghoulish vocals on here are just, it's a snarling, angry, bestial set of performances. And it's all about the excess of the modern age. It's all about, you know, capitalism and drowning in just this sort of hive that you see around you, this sort of just like this place that's filled with, you know, like the gutter trash piling into the streets. You feel disgusting. You feel like you are within a civilization that is beyond saving. So I guess it's quite poetic in a sense, but you know, it's mainly here through dedication to its intensity. And compositionally, it's fucking peerless. Like, this thing is nasty, it's mean, it whips you around without any regard for your well-being whatsoever. And the older I get, the more I really value experiences like that. This is some of the most intense shit you will ever hear. And you may not even get anything out of this, because you'd be like, this is literally just like a bunch of sounds. But there is method to the madness here, and I feel like I've been following enough of Theophonos's work over the years to say that, like, there really is something special about this movement of black metal and mathcore that captures something vital about existing in the modern world and just how fucking chaotic and insane it all is. And there's a part of you that listens to something like this and it just flattens you. It's that cleansing thing that I talked about with Meth Witch, you know? So next up, God, this sucks to do. And at number 162, it's Sade's Love Deluxe. Got really into Sade a couple of years back. Love all the records that I've heard from her. I still haven't heard Lover's Rock yet. I do plan to remedy that quite soon. I think she is coming out with new music in the near future, I remember reading somewhere. Regardless, I really dig Sade, but this sort of adventurous curtail into doing this trip-hop, sophistopop thing that's on the Love Deluxe, this thing's otherworldly. There's still so few albums that actually sound like this. And Sade is a central performer. Oh, man. Just that smooth R&B quality that's just like what D'Angelo was, I feel like, for like men as a sex symbol. I kind of feel like Sade was that, but for like women in R&B. And that voice, man, and the way that like it feels so effortless the way she performs. It feels like these gorgeous, perfect melodies are just falling out of her. It's crazy. And these instrumentals are so lush, so pretty. Like her earlier stuff, like her work with like, you know, the band and what have you, it's a bit more like what you might think from the genre. Whereas this is like a trailblazer. This is innovative. This is forward thinking. You know, you're not going to get a smooth operator on an album like Love Deluxe. Not to, you know, say anything bad about, God, what the fuck is that album's name? Diamond Life. Diamond Life is like, that's kind of a jazz pop album. Like, it has very sort of like, it sounds like Steely Dan at times. Whereas this is a whole new animal. This sort of just beautiful, shiny neo soul aesthetic. Again, I've just never really heard anything like it. Sade as a lyricist, the way she talks about intimacy and love and the desire to be desired it's universal. Like, I listen to her and it's just like, obviously I can't identify with your life experience, but boy howdy, I feel this shit in my soul. I might even be putting this a little bit too low on the list. It's not something I've listened to quite enough, even though I've probably given it like a half a dozen spins in full and total.
One eternity later.
Okay, So it is a different day than the previous time I was recording. I have a new webcam, which looks a wee bit nicer than the one I was using, so that's nice. And now I have coffee, so I don't get super duper sleepy, because that's why I stopped recording the last time. That's what happens when you record videos after you work 12-hour shifts. And unfortunately, I did lose the footage of me talking about this last little bit here, this last album that I decided on being here. So let's go over the Crown Guardian of the Mountains of Might. We have here No Means No, their album Wrong. No Means No are one of, if not outright, my favorite pure punk band ever. Imagine the pulse pounding, hard hitting, basic punk of something like Bad Religion, for instance. Something real gritty, something that has a lot of scrappiness to it, but with the instrumental versatility of something closer to the Mars Volta, for instance. This is a Canadian band who had been making music with people like the frontman of the Dead Kennedys, for instance, and these guys have just been kind of a major B-plus punk institution for a long time, and their incredible career has spanned decades and has many spectacular albums of all shapes and sizes, including a punk jazz album where they cover Miles Davis. This is exactly the kind of angry but also nerdy shit that I just live for. And Wrong here is an album that feels like it's constantly trying to play a joke on the person listening to it. And I mean that as the best possible compliment. This is a punk and post-hardcore album that is just, it obeys absolutely none of the traditional musical rules that you might be used to. Like when you think of punk music, if you think about something a little closer to the shininess of pop punk, this is about as far away from that as you can get without recording some random band in Idaho's basement recorded on a toaster as a demo tape that just sell at live shows. This is the real spirit of punk, but it also has this undeniable compositional proficiency that's just crazy. We've got time signature switch ups on here that will make your head spin. Shouty, angry gang vocals that are perfect to scream along to in the car, and hooks that will be stuck in your heads for days. It's catching up. Fuck. It's a blast. It is one of my favorite punk albums ever. It's something that I go to when I need that kind of punk grit that I think is just sort of in keeping with the genre, but also something that tickles that part of my brain that I just really love when something is truly progressive. And normally you kind of think that progressive musical ideas and punk musical ideas are kind of diametrically opposed, because punk was sort of a response to a lot of the hoity-toity prog that was, you know, happening around the 70s. So I can understand why this wouldn't be everybody's cup of tea. It is kind of two really broadly diametrically opposed musical things inelegantly crashing together. But what is punk if not being inelegant in the name of pure raw impact? And for my money, very few bands have done it as well, with as many great albums, with as many great sounds as No Means No do. And Wrong, if you ask me, is their best album, though there are plenty of great great records in this discography. I highly recommend this band just in general to anybody who wants to listen to some really, really cool, hard-hitting shit. So now that we have that out of the way, it's time to graduate to the threshold of the Titans. So let's see what is going to hold the line. Now, okay, it's time for a big one. The devil and God are raging inside me. Brand new. Now, if you had been watching any of us on this channel for any period of time, it's not exactly a secret that each and every one of us are not just fans, not just people who like the music of Brand New, we are enormous fans of this band's music. And if you are in the know, also, you might be aware of the fact that talking about Brand New is, well, it's kind of difficult these days. Jesse Lacey, the frontman, has had some controversy in years past that was a long time ago. I mean, like, when we found out about the controversy and the events that the controversy was about were even further in the past. And I'm not saying that to try and downplay Mr. Lacey's actions. I don't really know how to talk about any of that. Talking about canceled musicians and bands is also just sort of a minefield, but let's just say that I definitely don't listen to Brand New as much as I used to for a couple of reasons, partially just because it is kind of difficult. Lacey's issues are not nearly as awful as some of the nasty shit that a lot of other bands in the punk, pop punk, and vaguely emo, post-hardcore adjacent bands, like some of those guys have done some awful, awful things. And Lacey, yeah, he's a jackass who did some dumb shit. And did probably hurt some people. That being said, I can't deny that there was a time in my life in which the music of Brand New wasn't just important to me, it was foundational. It was one of the first things that Morgan and I ever truly bonded over. The first favorite album of his was The Devil and God Are Raging Inside Me. And thus, this album and Deja Entendu, they were two of the first albums I began listening to in general in high school when I met Morgan. And Devil and God was really interesting just because I knew it was, the record, an emo and punk staple at this point. I'm pretty sure that anybody who has been listening to this kind of music or has been paying attention to this band, they will tell you The Devil and God is a classic and nothing is going to change that. And that is absolutely true. It's also just kind of an album that meant a lot to me at a point in my life that I don't really like thinking about anymore. There was a time where Brand New wasn't just Morgan's favorite band. After the release of Science Fiction, that music helped me get through, like, some of the roughest shit that I ever went through. And, I'll talk about that when I get to Science Fiction, because Brand New are one of the bands on here who do have multiple 10 out of 10s from me. And Devil and God is less my specific kind of album, but it is one of those enshrined classics that's just kind of difficult to argue. Lacey as a lyricist, there are few people who did it better, frankly. This guy, the way he wrote changed the way I thought about music. It's often incredibly excoriating, it's flowery, it's prosaic, it's contradictory. It's, in many ways, I would call Jesse Lacey the Bob Dylan of punk music. And I know that sounds very music writer headliney, but like, really dissect some of the lyrics here and tell me I'm wrong. Songs like Jesus Christ have been in my lexicon forever. And to some extent, probably will be. But at the same time, I haven't given The Devil and God a full spin in a couple of years now, and it's for all of the reasons that I just mentioned. But if you divorce it from all that junk, it's a great record. Every single one of these songs is so fully formed, so structurally kind of adventurous. I think that the rhythm section on this album is deeply underappreciated. Like, the drumming on every brand new album is so careful, it's so considered. But when it needs to really go for a kind of blistering just enormity, it does it a little bit more often on, you know, albums like Your Favorite Weapon or Deja Entendu. But this is kind of the moment where they meet their youthful, juvenile, blistering excitement with a more mature, thoughtful direction that they would go and pursue on albums like Daisy and Science Fiction. And Daisy and Science Fiction are weirder, wiry, unkempt albums that kind of speak to me a little bit more than this does, but I can't knock the undeniable perfection on display here. I really can't. It's just an album that also is wrapped up in thorny teenage toxicity. Like, that's what it's about. This is an album that's kind of about self-loathing and kind of about discovering what it feels like to actually hate yourself and how kind of self-defeating that is. And it got me through a lot. And I'm very, very thankful for it. And I'm very thankful for Brand New in general. But I am kind of glad that I'm at a point where this record in particular is one that I don't really come back to outside of specific songs. If I had to pick a favorite just for the record, I think these days, while I have, again, spent many sad nights giving a good cry to songs like Jesus Christ, and I love the just pummeling intensity of something like Archers or The Archers Bows Have Broken, depending on which album variant you're listening to. But I think these days I gotta go with Luca. There's just something about that mournful way that it begins and the way that Lacey's vocals are mic'd on here that's so forlorn. And that's to say nothing of Limousine, maybe the most infamous sort of emo anthem of this period. Calling it an anthem is kind of gross, honestly, but Limousine is one of those notorious songs like La Dispute's King Park, for instance, which is based off of a real-life tragedy and renders it in such startling detail that, like, if I were to listen to The Devil and God Are Raging Inside Me right now, I'd probably have to skip it. It's bordering on too much. It's a lot, but I can't deny that this has cemented a permanent place in my canon and in everyone I know's canon. And this is probably the only avenue I was ever going to get to discuss this, because we did toss around the idea of talking about Brand New in a legitimate capacity, but it was too difficult of a subject for us to really broach, you know? So yeah, it's a great record, and I have no problem putting it on a list like this, but it is also kind of a painful reminder of stuff that I'm glad that I've moved past. Let's go and find something a little bit more palatable, which should not be difficult, even though there are lots of sad albums on here. Okay, from one big one to another. Still Life by Opeth. Morgan and I made a video on the entire discography of Opeth a couple of years ago. It was kind of a last-minute video that we just sort of threw together just because we didn't need to do a whole lot of preparation, just because when Morgan and I discovered Porcupine Tree and Opeth in the same, like, week-long span when I was in college, it was like these bands were all we listened to. Like, I had never heard of them, and I just remember Morgan, like, sending me a text message one day of just being like, I think this is the best death metal album I've ever heard, and it was Blackwater Park. And Opeth is a band that I love so much. They do also have multiple 10 out of 10s from me, and it's difficult to decide which of them is my favorite because they are all such distinct statements, you know? Like, it's really, really difficult. But Still Life, to me, feels like the moment where Opeth finally arrived. And I say that not to denigrate the albums that came before this. I think that an album like My Arms, Your Hearse is also a masterpiece. But those albums that come before this, they have more grit to them. That's for certain. This is a little bit more polished, but with that polished comes refinement. It comes maturity. It becomes this density of insane compositions. Like, Still Life is one of those albums that I really took for granted just how perfect it was when I first heard it. Another album that when I was first getting into music like this, it was a little bit easier to understand because its cleaner edges and the proggier parts of it were stuff that I already got along with. So when Mikael Åkerfeldt switches up and sounds like a stone cold fucking demon, I was able to kind of process a little bit more. And Åkerfeldt as a frontman, one of the best to ever do it. Opeth is a band that is about balancing hellish, insanely dense, incredibly intricate musical structures and like insanely prosaic, flowery, ornate, beautiful detail. Sometimes all at once, sometimes one, sometimes the other. They're just kind of a band that feel like they bow to the whim of the spirit of creativity. Like, this period kickstarted maybe the best era for any death metal band or any metal band that has ever worked. And I really, really mean that. Opeth's catalog is undeniably great. And I think Still Life, if you asked me what is the objective, one of my least favorite words, what is their best album, irrespective of my own feelings, taste, and preferences, I would have to say Still Life. This is one of those albums like Master of Puppets that it serves as an emblem for its genre. This is a record that like really ups the game in terms of conceptual storytelling, narrative design, but also just the production on here. This is before Steven Wilson started producing for the band and before they kind of expanded their horizons in just how ethereal they could make their music sound. This is still utterly unbelievable as a feat of mixing, mastering, engineering, anything you can fucking think of. This album does it well. It wasn't one of my favorites when I started off with Opeth just because I was a little bit more into where the band went from here and how they elaborated on this style. But when I go back to it, I'm just like, oh, but there's such a blatant display of how excellently these guys have mastered the fundamentals of how well they work together as a band. This is just one of those albums that, like, even if you're not interested in death metal or even metal, I think you should still listen to Still Life just because it's one of those things that, like, yeah, if I made a list of albums to listen to before you die, that would probably be on it. Very high. As a matter of fact, that's a good topic to talk about in the future. Everybody knows I'm an Opeth fan. If only I was wearing my Opeth shirt, but an easy choice for being higher up on this list. Okay, I guess this is only a list of heavy hitters, but we're going with some more because right now we're going with Sulaki by Slowdive. This YouTube channel has essentially documented every step of the way of my journey of becoming a fan of Slowdive. In early 2021, there was a period where I was stuck inside a lot. We had a lot of bad weather, a lot of snow, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, it was post-COVID, all of that nonsense. And I kind of had a couple days off to myself, and I did nothing but mainline every Slowdive album, every Slowdive EP. I've listened to every Slowdive compilation. That's kind of when I know that a band that I love has become a favorite. When I'm like trawling through the internet trenches to find every compilation, B-sides, every song, and then adding it to my music library, that's how I know they become a favorite. And last year, I actually did get to see them perform in Louisville at a lovely little venue, and Rhiannon and I went, and it was genuinely one of the most unbelievably beautiful live music experiences I think I've ever had. Just being in that venue with that acoustics, with those people in that environment who were all also very obviously big fans of Slowdive. Fun fact that while they performed, like nobody dressed like you would expect British people to dress. Like every single person was dressed like they were from the American Midwest. Everybody looked like they were truckers, except for Rachel Goswell, of course, who kind of went up there looking like a gothier Stevie Nicks, who her singing voice still absolutely immaculate. I'm sorry that I once made fun of the way that you guys dressed because you liked an Instagram story where I said that you all looked like you came from Iowa. That said, Souvlaki here is one of the 90s alternative albums. It was kind of born out of that UK, not quite Britpop, but the Britpop that was commingling with shoegaze at the time. Oasis were very much a band that rose the tide of all other ships in the harbor, so to speak, and I think Slowdive probably benefited from that. Like The Verve, for instance, that I talked about a couple of entries ago. Very much a similar thing, but Slowdive are the shoegaze band, and in many respects, this is the shoegaze album. So it's funny that, like, of the albums of theirs, which I have given perfect scores to, of which there are 3, which, goddamn, some people might be surprised to see this album being lower than the other 2 records, just because, again, this is the fan favorite, the acclaimed one. And honestly, what I said for Still Life actually kind of applies here too, in that it feels like from the debut, this is the album where they crystallized who they were, what they sounded like, how they were going to work together, and with the production of one Mr. Brian Eno, it really sends this album into the stratosphere. Again, this is just a classic song after classic song after classic song kind of deal. When the Sun Hits, Allison, like these are songs that I literally could listen to whenever, no matter the mood. Slowdive are a really malleable band, tonally speaking, I feel. So it's really easy to listen to them when you're feeling wistful or sad or just calm or whatever. And as much as I love this record, which I most certainly do, back when I still had Last FM, the album I had with the most scrobbles, just single listens of songs, was Souvlaki. In fact, I think I've probably spent more time listening to Souvlaki than any other album on this list. All of them. Which is nuts. So, like, maybe it's just I've been exposed to it so much that I just prefer the tangents that the band goes on after this. And I definitely do. But they are such wholly different statements. Like, you could say that these 3 albums are kind of different genres that all just kind of happen to fit under the same broad umbrella. And I do love this record a lot. The other albums just kind of, they're a bit stranger in some instances, like Pygmalion, which I'll talk about, but their uniqueness certainly gives them a foot ahead, in my opinion anyway. But it is no less perfect, no less amazing of a statement. I could throw this album on literally whenever. I have it on vinyl. Sounds absolutely perfect, because it is. Whew, moving right along. We're doing our first repeat artist, I guess. We are doing Kind of Blue. Miles Davis. Now, I talked about In a Silent Way earlier, and frankly, these albums are damn near interchangeable. Both 10s, obviously, but they are very, very specific moments in the lineage of an artist's releases. Like Davis was so prolific, made so much music along with his creative partnership with the sort of producer and engineer Tio Macero. There was just something was in the air. And this guy did nothing but crank out masterpiece after masterpiece. The difference is that In a Silent Way kind of kicks off the era of his career where there's a bit more experimentation. There's a bit more breaking of the rules. You know, we're going a little bit further into jazz fusion and ultimately culminating into jazz funk before we kind of have that era that nobody really likes to talk about of Miles Davis's career. But Kind of Blue is much more of what you would typically expect from a jazz album. And normally that would mean that In a Silent Way would be the album I would prefer. And for a while, I think I did, but Kind of Blue does have a bit of an advantage in this case because I had waited a very long time to listen to it. I think I first heard it again in 2021. And I say again because when I was a kid, I would listen to CDs in order to go to sleep. Like my mom had a CD that was like a bunch of classic like Disney songs that I would listen to when I was like really super duper young, just because it like helped me focus, I guess. And as I graduated to listening to actual proper music in order to go to sleep on a like literal boombox, not quite a boombox, it was just sort of it was kind of pill shaped. It was very strange looking. I don't even know if you can buy those in like Target or Walmart these days. Jesus Christ, I'm fucking old. But Kind of Blue is way more cool, smooth jazz that is from an earlier point in Davis's career. It's kind of just out of the post-bop phase. It is very typical of the genre. But what holds it aloft is naturally the strength of the songs themselves and the fact that I have such a nostalgic tie to them. The CDs I would listen to were primarily the Ken Burns Jazz Collection. It came in this like weird DVD thing that was like this big, and it had like a bunch of different discs, and I'm pretty sure it was meant to serve as some sort of like highlight and quasi timeline of how jazz kind of evolved with its most significant artists. And when I went and revisited this, I didn't even know I was revisiting it because I was like, you know, that was so far back in the past. I didn't know any of the people who were performing on Ken Burns' jazz. For all I knew, it was fucking, you know, John Coltrane doing this shit. But when I heard songs like Freddie Freeloader, for instance, I was like, oh my God, I know this song. And most people do. This is like, I think it might be the most commercially successful jazz album of all time. Like, a lot of people own this record in some form or fashion. And, you know, I almost feel like it might be one of those albums that reaches such capacity. It's so big that I feel like a lot of people might just, you know, dismiss it. Don't do that. The way this album is recorded, the way it is structured, the way that these performers weave in and out of each other, it is sublime. Like I said, I don't know much about the technicalities of jazz. Talking about jazz, talking about albums like John Coltrane's Ascension early on in the podcast was one of the biggest sort of challenges for me specifically, because I already kind of struggle with trying to verbalize my thoughts on music, especially 5 years ago. But now I still don't really feel as equipped to talk about it. But at the same time, I know when I'm hearing something that I love. And Kind of Blue is nostalgic to me. You know, it holds a special place in my heart because it does have music rooted in my past, but I listen to it today and I'm like, this is just something that suits all purposes. I need, like, one day when I actually have like money and start cooking and shit, I want to be able to play my Kind of Blue vinyl while I'm like making dinner and shit. just because it's great music to sort of do another activity to, kind of feel the music flow through you as you move around. Like, it is one of the few jazz albums that I actually do feel like I best enjoy it when I am mobile, which is not necessarily true for even other Miles Davis albums, like another album I will be talking about later, shocker, Bitches Brew. Bitches Brew is an album that is so like colossal and immersive, I kind of have to sit still to listen to it. Kind of Blue, on the other hand, it's almost a synesthetic quality. It's like, I mean it in the nicest way possible when I say that you feel as though you can taste and smell the music on this. And it is just this light, sort of airy, wafting, warm thing. And I love it. It makes me feel centered. It makes me feel grounded, but it also, yeah, it reminds me of my childhood. And I remember a lot of evenings where my mom would be cooking and one of the songs from this album would be playing there. Hell, I'll go over to my mom's place for dinner these days and she might be listening to it while she makes food. So, you know, that's why it's here. It's good to make food too. I'm sure if Miles Davis were alive, he'd be thrilled to know that I said that. Some classic Jake core about to be unleashed here. Meliora by Ghost. It's difficult to position myself as somebody who's trying to sell the appeal of Ghost these days, because it's weird how really big this band got, mostly because of the success of this record, both critical and commercial. So it's weird to kind of approach this band as it's like one of those weirder metal acts that only people like us give a shit about. But like, Ghost is borderline mainstream. Like, if Sleep Token is basically the most popular, newer, modern metal band, I don't think it's insane to think that Ghost is probably the only other band that even competes in that wheelhouse. And while some of their newer records haven't really been the huge crowd pleasers that something like this or Opus Eponymous was, you know, I still do really love this band. But I would be lying if I said that Meliora here didn't account for like 70% of my love, if that makes sense. Like, I would still love this band and many of their albums, but if Ghost had not made Meliora, I don't think they would have been one of my favorite metal bands. And I still would consider them mostly up there, but they're also a band that don't ever really feel like they're done trying new things, even if their audience doesn't like it. So maybe they'll capture me as hard with something down the line as hard as they did with something like this, though I doubt it. But I don't mean to naysay, because Meliora, this is one of the best heavy metal albums of the 2010s. Go listen to it right now if you haven't, because it is a perfect gateway metal record. It sounds very accessible, but it also has muscle. There's a lot of progressive elements that are on here, a lot of dense instrumentation, but it never stops having momentum. I think that Tobias Forge as a songwriter has never, ever been more on point than he is here. He harnesses the camp theatricality, but also the kind of sincere, wayward soul kind of deal that Ghosts deal with, in that they're a band that speaks to people who are not quite misanthropes, but people who've been ostracized from, I don't want to say like society, because that feels a little bit too high-minded for what I'm trying to talk about, but like, they are kind of a populist metal band, and I kind of feel like that's something that has been lost. And when something is this good at being populist, you gotta be able to give it its due respect. I still listen to songs from this album all the time, whether or not it's the silly but still undeniable rager that is something like Mummy Dust, or the Grammy-winning, incredibly satisfyingly structured Cerise. This is just kind of a record that has everything you could be looking for in a modern heavy metal record. And it has flourishes of arena rock. This is an album that, for as much as it takes after bands like what's the band called? Merciful Fate, or even, you know, some of 80s thrash, it's also taking some from Queen and ABBA and all kinds of stuff. And it's just a blast. It is an album that is exactly as long as it needs to be. It does not overstay its welcome, but it also gives you enough to chew on. It is a blast. I love listening to this album. It doesn't really go any higher than this for me, even though I think once upon a time I probably would have put this in my top 10, but that was back when I had probably heard less than 50 records, so I still think that it's not insignificant that after all these years, Melior is still an album that, for as much music as I have consumed, and for as fringe as some of my taste, especially in heavy music, has become, that it still has this special place in my heart. I think that it is still worth celebrating, even if it is kind of a basic pick nowadays, but like, I don't know, man, fuck you, it's great. One of the most recent albums on here, Weight of the Mask. Svalbard. I talked about this briefly when we did our end of the year video, the year that this album was released. And unfortunately, bad me, I still have not listened to Svalbard's previous albums, despite being assured by several reliable sources that they are great. And I'm gonna get there eventually. It is just kind of difficult to pry myself away from an album like The Weight of the Mask. This is an album that I cite as being crucial to just getting me through 2024. It's an album that is very confessional, incredibly heart on sleeve. The lyrics in this are emo and post-hardcore, even though this is very, very obviously a black gaze album. This is going to be something that lots of people who love Death Heaven really, really fuck with. But there is, again, that emo slant that they have really does make them super unique. The production on this album is terrific. It is dense, it is hard-hitting, and I love how tangible the lead vocals are on here. They are pained, agonized, and they're also incredibly coherent. That's not always something you can rely on. Like, I can't listen to Death Heaven and immediately know what George is saying all the time unless I have read the lyrics alongside listening to it, just because sometimes it's just kind of indiscernible with certain vocal styles. So I think that balancing all of these elements as well as they do is commendable in and of itself, but it's the writing and song structures here that really keep this anchored as being one of the most emotionally affecting albums I ever heard. I felt really isolated last year. I spent some time in the hospital. I cut myself off from my friends for a little while just because I needed to get out of a really bad headspace I was in, and I needed to be able to work through it myself. And man, there are not a lot of true blue metal albums that can get me to just like weep the way that this album does, even if they have songs that mean a lot to me or are sad or are effective. This is an album that deals with specific subject material and it makes no apologies for it. There are songs about honoring the work of dead musicians who died too soon and you wanting to appreciate the work that they left behind for you and for everyone. It's about, you know, appreciating art, but it's also about, like, the opening track on here is so incredible. It's about looking back at a photo of yourself from the past and suddenly being hit with the realization that the the face, the expression, the smile that you see looking back at you, you don't recognize it because you knew that you weren't happy when that photo was taken. You smiled because someone told you to, but when you look back at something that should remind you of something happy, a permanent imagistic reminder, and instead all you can see is what was going on inside your head. It's really specific song conceits, and I respect them so much for being able to nail this concept as well as they do. This is an incredible album. I love it very, very much. One of the most underrated albums of the decade so far, and I hope I get to a point where maybe I can appreciate this for the astounding work of musicianship and production and engineering that it is. However, right now, the wound is still a bit fresh, so I can appreciate it for some of its more immediate qualities, but those immediate qualities, they're no less worthy of celebration. All right, let's talk about something a little underrated. Odyssey. Yes, I do know how it is. The spelling's funky, I know. And Oracle by the Zombies. Best way I can put this, other than this is the album that has the song Time of the Season on it, which you probably don't know from name alone, but if you listen to it, you'll recognize the sort of phonetic hook that this song has. You'll get it if you get it. But this album is, in my opinion anyway, based on what I've heard, and frankly, I do have a couple blind spots when it comes to 60s like psychedelic pop. Like, I still haven't listened to that much of the Kinks, for instance, but I supremely doubt that I will find another 60s psych pop album that I like more than this. And I mean, I like it more than every Beatles record. I like it more than every Beach Boys record. I like it more than anybody else you can name in this field. It's one of those albums that was just like, the point of it was to make a beautiful studio album. So this has kind of a Sergeant Pepper / Pet Sounds quality to how gorgeous its sound is. The recording is immaculate. And the Zombies are weird because it wasn't really the product of the bandmates themselves, I believe. Like, I kind of think that it was actually sort of organized and put together by an outside force, which is why they didn't really, like, last beyond this record, and I think only reunited for a new album semi-recently, but apparently it wasn't very good, so I didn't listen to it. But I do think that this bats it out with the best of them. This album has some really fascinatingly kind of specific song conceits and ideas about things like people reuniting with loved ones who went to prison and unknowingly wanting to spend time with them, but not realizing that because they had been in prison so long, they have changed and will ultimately not connect with the person that you are. But all of that is wrapped up into like a beautiful sunshine pop song with like these incredible arrays of instrumentation and like diverse sound play. This is a pop album with atmosphere. This album takes you to a place. And I think the songwriting, as blasphemous as this sounds, I think the songs on here, you take a scalpel to them. They're just as impressive as anything McCartney, Lennon, or Wilson, or even something like the Velvet Underground. Any of those bands, I think this is as good, if not better. And because these songs have been so, like, they haven't been thrust to the forefront of pop culture as aggressively as stuff like the Beatles, I think that you might find this a breath of fresh air regardless of how well you respond to other albums like it. So if you haven't heard this album, please remedy that. I highly recommend tracking down like one of the anniversary remasters that includes a bunch of like demos and stuff because they actually sound really great too. And we don't have a lot of music from the Zombies. I think we only have like two really full-fledged albums from this lineup, but this is the one, man. I adore this record. All right, let's do another classic. Bad Motor Finger by Soundgarden. Another episode that we have done in the past. I think it was for the 1991 retrospective. I think this album came out in 1991, but I could be wrong. Jake in the future, editing Jake, check on that shit. Regardless, I love Soundgarden. Soundgarden, of the kind of big grunge staple bands, Soundgarden is my pick for my favorite. Why? I don't really know. I kind of think that it has to do... It's sort of twofold. On the one hand, I just love Soundgarden's classic records. Both Bad Motorfinger and Super Unknown are just untouchable staples of this movement, genre, and scene. The other reason? Chris Cornell, man. Eddie Vedder, Kurt Cobain, all my love to those guys, but to me, Cornell was the grunge frontman, and just kind of grunge in general. His voice, I had loved Cornell's voice since I was like young because my mom was a huge fan of his. Became a huge fan after we saw Casino Royale and he did the Bond theme. The best Bond theme, by the way, if you'd like a hot take. But Bad Motorfinger here, this is an album, it's kind of taken for granted just how insane some of these grunge albums are, just because when you think about it, you think about Nirvana, you think about Nevermind. And by today's standards, Nevermind is kind of an easy pill to swallow. You know, it's a more commercial record than something like Bleach. But on Bad Motorfinger, you got a fucking song that has a saxophone on it on here. This is some weird, wild shit. Room 1,000 Years Wide feels every bit as much like grunge and almost heavy metal as it does like borderline psychedelic. This is a record that just delivers on being everything you want from a specific movement. And in fact, it's kind of why I am a little bit cooler on albums like Nevermind than most, because this to me is just more adventurous. It's more boundary pushing. It's more my kind of album. It has kind of a fuller sound to it too. And just as an album experience, like I think the only reason I would put Bad Motorfinger over Super Unknown for me, both masterpieces for the record, is that like the flow of Bad Motorfinger feels more cohesive to me. Super Unknown's an album that it's kind of exhausting to listen to by design, for sure, but it also just, I feel like the one flaw that album has is that its pacing, it's a little bit long, just a tiny bit. But Bad Motorfinger, I don't think this feels like a second too long. Everything on here is exciting. It's also morose. I also just love the songwriting on here. There's a lot of more political stuff that's actually on this album, some kind of like post-Reagan sentiments that are happening here. And, you know, I know that that's not exactly, like normally you would figure I would go for the more insular, inward-looking album in the form of Super Unknown. But I don't know, I kind of feel like this is sort of a reverse Kid A, OK Computer. It's like if Radiohead dropped Kid A first, except, you know, with grunge. It's kind of a silly thing to say, but I do kind of genuinely think that. This album would be kind of a blast, and I guess it is, but it is a dark, very frequently morose album. Just sort of embodies everything you associate with grunge, but with a little bit more excitement. And just Soundgarden in general, even their earlier stuff from before this, I still think is really great. So yeah, this is my favorite grunge album for my favorite grunge band. All right, continuing along, a big one, literally the Sear Swans. talked about this album in like a Now episode, I think, a long time ago. Oh yeah, that's right. When we did an episode about our favorite like really long albums. And for those of you who don't know, Swans are a kind of industrial slash post-rock band who have been kicking it for a really long time and are somewhat notable for having a kind of late career resurrection that it didn't begin with the Seer. I think it began with My Father Will Guide Me Up a Rope to the Sky. And then this is like the beginning of the trilogy of records that really put them on the map again. And the name of the game with new, very, very post-rock oriented Swans is that it is all about repetition. It's all about hypnotic, looping structures, verses, stuff that really, like, you gotta be patient to be a late era Swans fan. This is one of the most not for everyone albums and bands ever. And the Seer is like the most far gone of all of these albums. And that's kind of why I love it, is because listening to this, it's a trial. This is an album that is kind of painful to experience, and it will try your patience. It's fucking long. These songs are long, and sometimes the same movement will repeat for like 10 minutes. You gotta be into that weird liminal state that music like this can sort of lull you into. But if you can get to that point, if you can listen to music like this enough to the point where you really can start to feel something otherworldly possess you when listening to an album like this, or To Be Kind, or The Glowing Man, or even their most recent, it is this kind of, this build to a like 2001 A Space Odyssey, Monolith, mind-blowing kind of shit. It's an album that is about just what raw noise can do when it is weaponized in the way that Michael Gira and company weaponize it on here. This is just, it's an evil album. The Seer is a dark, evil fucking record. Maybe like the most evil record on this entire list, because it's such a hopeless, defeating, terrifying experience. But it does have moments where, you know, there's the song on there with Karen O, Song for a Warrior, that gives you reprieve, but it's 4 minutes of reprieve on a 2-hour album. And I feel like in some respects, it's almost like that's a cruel joke, but it is sort of part of the grand design of everything. Instrumentally speaking, this is just absolutely peerless. Not only is everybody doing what they're doing incredibly well, it's just kind of a marvel to witness something like this being made on this scale. This new Swans trilogy of records really does feel like a kind of, I don't want to say like death knell because that implies something kind of negative, but it kind of feels like this is the last gasp of rock music in the kind of alternative space. Like, it is the final form of rock music. It has been pushed as far as it will go, and it will remain here until someone pushes it even further. And The Seer is this concept at its most antagonistic, at its most ugly, strange. It's an album of oddities. Like, if you want to listen to Swans and you want to start here, I mean, you're a crazy person, but like, more power to you. However, if you want to get started with them, try something like White Life Through the Mouth of Infinity. That's something that's a little bit easier to get, but it also gives you what Swans are. Or even Children of God actually might be a better comp. This is a masterpiece, don't get me wrong, but starting with one of these newer Swans albums, you are not doing yourself any favors. With the amount of repetition, with the amount of just crushing riffs and industrial noise on here, and Michael Gira's kind of flat, monotone delivery that nonetheless feels like it harbors so much power within it, it is an experience that I think one should cherish. It's another album that it's not necessarily a still life situation where it's like, oh, you got to hear this before you die, but it's almost an album that like you have to try to experience an album like this. Maybe not specifically like this, but you know, like this or Everywhere at the End of Time by like The Caretaker. This is the same, I would put this in the same place in terms of music that almost does not care if it is consumed or listened to by anyone. It is purely just born from the creative id of musicians with no goal of mass consumption in mind. And for that, I do respect it, but it's not about respect. It's about feeling this horrible, horrible, ghastly, ugly thing, this creature, this satanic thing that's in this album. It's truly something to behold. It's one of those things where I would never recommend this to normal people because I mean, I don't want them to hate me, but like, if you can find somebody who really fucks with Swans and, you know, you get to talk about your favorite records, this was the avenue for me to get into music that you had to talk about online, to talk about it like with other people. And I feel like that was kind of important for my development of just learning how to converse with other people about art that was not populist, I guess. I'm using that word a lot, but it's because I tend to oscillate between the extremes of I like a lot of music that is made for everybody, and I also like a lot of music that is made for absolutely fucking nobody. And the series kind of made for nobody. But in that respect, it's kind of made for me, if you know what I mean. Okay, the Threshold of Titans will be capped off now with... Man, this is already starting to become incredibly difficult. It's gonna be Sunbather by Death Heaven. This is another album I talked about really early on in the podcast when I sort of first got into this band, and I didn't actually start with this record. I believe I heard Ordinary Corrupt Human Love first, maybe? I can't actually recall at the moment, but I think that's how I experienced the records. Point being, though, this was... I mean, I listened to this. I bought this album on vinyl before I was done listening to it for the first time. I made it halfway in and I'm like, man, the rest of this album could be fucking trash and I would still want to own this first half on vinyl. And I tracked down a special copy of it that had, it was a split LP, so it had one vinyl disc that was, I think, like a translucent pink to match the cover, and also like a hard gold, which is like one of my favorite vinyl that I own. But we have an episode on this if you want to know our thoughts more broadly speaking. We did a video on it for its 10th anniversary. But man, this is such a special album. Divisive at the time, very music writer, music blog sort of record that didn't birth Black Gaze in the sense that it was the first Black Gaze album, but it was kind of the first album of its kind to be as big as it was. And naturally, all of the true cult metalheads hated it because, you know, it wasn't recorded in a cave with a box of scraps. But the fidelity here almost doesn't even matter. It's just about the crushing intensity of something like this. Black Gaze is all about the ways in which atmosphere and form collide together and explode. And there are a few albums that kind of do what this does better than it. Like, and you know, Death Heaven as a band, you could kind of argue that they've been trying to live up to the initial success and just general vibe of Sunbather, even though I love a lot of the records that came after that, particularly the one from this year, Lonely People with Power, I think is probably the second best, even though I still think there are other records, in particular, Infinite Granite and New Bermuda. There are lots of different things about these records, but the core of the sound here, combined with George Clark's writing, particularly with like what it's about and the journey this album takes you on, it's a very special record to a lot of people, and I am one such person. I am infinitely grateful that I kind of got to talk about this album with my friends just because it was such a unique experience at the time. It's not like it was the first Black Gaze album I ever heard, but it was like, oh, I'm listening to a classic. It's like I just sort of knew the first time I heard it, even though I didn't really pay attention to it just because 2013 was just, a little bit before I was getting into music. So this album somewhat missed me. I had only heard Morgan mention it in passing, but I didn't even know if he liked it at the time. But now, this is just like, not only is this a Black Gaze and just sort of metal staple now, I think you could also argue that it's an emo staple. The lyrics on here and Clark in general as a writer, it's very Midwest emo in a lot of ways. And I know that this channel, we often talk about this is why this thing that isn't emo technically is emo, but like not. Like take a look at some of the songs on here. I think you'll get what I'm putting down, but it's a one-of-a-kind experience that I don't think any band has really been able to replicate just how paradigm shifting this combination of sounds ended up being. There are Black Gaze albums that I do like a little bit more than this, but I don't think there were any that were probably more important to the movement. And I mean, just not to mention, just from a musical standpoint, God, this album is gorgeous. If you want to use this as a way to get into heavy music, as a way to get into black metal, don't let anybody on the internet stop you. You've got to start somewhere, and not everybody can immediately click with Blaze in the Northern Sky. Not everybody can immediately click with albums that just, by traditional standards, don't sound good. Not everybody is willing to throw themselves into the fire that is the Bathory self-titled. Like, we need gateway albums, but gateway albums do not inherently mean that they are lesser, and I feel like Sunbather basically proves that just by existing.